I'm Denise Foster, 28 years old, and I thought I knew my family until that dinner changed everything. We were gathered around the table in our Atlanta home, the kind of place that screams old money, but I wasn't there to play their game. My startup was my life, my passion building tech that could change the world. But to my parents and sister, it was a joke, a childish dream I should have ditched years ago. I sat there in my jeans and sweater, the odd one out, while they flaunted designer clothes and smug smiles. The air was thick with tension as forks clinked against plates. Then my mom leaned forward, her voice sharp as a knife. "Denise, we're done bailing you out," she snapped. "We're not your bank anymore." My dad nodded, his eyes cold like I was some charity case they were tired of funding. My sister chimed in, her laugh cutting deeper than words, saying I'd never match her success. They thought they were teaching me a lesson, putting me in my place. I stayed quiet, my phone buzzing in my pocket with a message I knew would flip their world upside down. They had no idea what was coming, no clue I held the keys to everything they valued. If you think their smugness lasted, stick around, this story's about to turn their laughter to silence. If you want to see how I turned their words against them, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. As the appetizers hit the table, my mom's voice turned ice cold. "Denise, your little tech project is a waste of time," she said, slicing through the hum of clinking glasses. Her eyes locked on me, sharp with disappointment, as if I'd personally insulted her by chasing my startup dream. Mom leaned back in her chair, her diamond necklace glinting under the chandelier. "You're almost 30. When are you going to grow up and get a real job?" Dad didn't miss a beat. He set his wineglass down, his face stern like he was delivering a verdict. "Your sister's out there closing million-dollar deals in real estate," he said, gesturing toward Tracy, who smirked across the table. "That's what success looks like, Denise, not some app that hasn't made a dime." His words stung, but I kept my face neutral, my hands folded in my lap. I wasn't about to give them the reaction they wanted. Tracy, of course, couldn't resist piling on. She tossed her hair, her gold bracelet catching the light, and launched into a story about her latest triumph. "Just signed a contract for a downtown condo project," she bragged, her voice dripping with pride. "7 figures, Denise. That's the kind of money you'll never see chasing your silly dreams." She laughed, a sharp cutting sound that made my stomach twist. "You're still living off our scraps, aren't you? Always needing a handout." Mom nodded, her lips pursed. "We've been too soft on you," she said, folding her napkin with deliberate precision. "Tracy's right. You can't keep leeching off us forever." The accusation landed like a punch, but I didn't flinch. I'd heard this before, every family gathering, every holiday, the same tired script. They thought I was the weak link, the failure who'd never measure up to their polished high society standards. Dad leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "It's time you stood on your own 2 feet, Denise. No more safety net. You need to learn what it means to work for something." He spoke as if he'd built his fortune from nothing, not from the trust fund that paid for their mansion, their cars, their entire lifestyle. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I stayed silent, letting their words wash over me like a cold wave. Tracy wasn't done. She sipped her wine, her eyes glinting with amusement. "Maybe you should take a page from my book," she said. "Get a real estate license, start small, actually contribute to this family." Her tone was patronizing, like she was talking to a child. "You're not cut out for this startup nonsense. It's embarrassing, honestly." I clenched my jaw, my fingers tightening around the edge of my chair. Their words weren't new, but they cut deeper tonight, each jab a reminder of how little they thought of me. They saw me as a dreamer, a burden, someone who'd never amount to anything. But I wasn't here to argue or beg for their approval. I felt the weight of my phone in my pocket, a silent promise of what was to come. They thought they held all the cards, that they could dictate my future with their money and their judgment. The dining room buzzed with their confidence, their smug certainty that they were in control. Mom's sharp glances, Dad's condescending tone, Tracy's mocking laughter, they were so sure of themselves, so convinced they'd put me in my place. I let them talk, let them dig their own grave with every word. They had no idea I was about to rewrite the rules of their game. When everyone raised their glasses for a toast, my phone buzzed with a message. I glanced at the screen, my pulse quickening as I saw the name Margaret Lee, the trust fund manager. Her text was brief but heavy. Approve monthly allowances for Edward, Nancy, Tracy Foster, $20,000 each. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, the weight of what was coming settling over me. Their sharp words from earlier, their smug confidence still burned in my mind. They thought they'd put me in my place. But the truth was about to hit them hard. I caught Shannon Reed's eye across the room. My best friend and startup partner knew the stakes. She'd been with me through every late-night coding session, every investor pitch, every moment of doubt. I gave a subtle nod and she slipped away from her conversation, joining me near the bar. "They're in for a shock," she whispered, her voice low but buzzing with anticipation. "They don't know you're the one calling the shots." "Hi." I leaned closer, my tone steady. "They've been living off my decisions for years," I said, glancing at Mom, Dad, and Tracy laughing with their high society crowd. Time to wake them up. The dining room doors swung open and Margaret Lee stepped in, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. She carried a leather folder, her face calm, but all businesslike. She was here to settle a score. The chatter faded, guests sensing a shift in the air. Mom's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing at the interruption. Dad set his glass down, his jaw tightening. Tracy, mid-sentence, froze, her gaze flicking to the stranger. "Miss Foster," Margaret said, her voice cutting through the room as she addressed me. "I need your approval for the trust fund disbursements." She opened the folder, revealing documents stamped with the trust's seal. Every head turned to me, the silence thick with confusion. Dad let out a sharp laugh, dismissive. "This is nonsense," he said, his tone booming. "Denise, managing the trust. She's just a dreamer with a failing app." Mom chimed in, her voice tight. "You're mistaken, Margaret. Our daughter doesn't handle our finances. She can't even handle her own." Tracy smirked, crossing her arms. "What's this, some kind of prank?" she said, her tone dripping with scorn. "Denise controlling our money? She's a nobody." Margaret didn't flinch. She slid a document across the table, pointing to a highlighted line. "Miss Denise Foster has been the sole trustee of the $20 million Foster Family Trust since age 25, she said, her words clear and unshakable. "She oversees all assets, your mansion, cars, and monthly allowances of $20,000 each. No funds are released without her signature." The room froze. Dad's face went pale, his confidence crumbling. Mom's hand clutched her necklace, her eyes wide. Tracy's smirk vanished, her glass trembling in her hand. Margaret closed her folder, gave me a curt nod, and turned toward the door. "I'll await your decision, Miss Foster," she said, her heels echoing as she left. The silence that followed was deafening, their stunned faces locked on me. I stood up, my voice steady and sharp. "For 3 years I've approved every dollar you've spent," I said, meeting their eyes. "Your cars, your vacations, Tracy's condo deals, all of it rests on my signature. You thought you were in control, but it's always been me." Their world was unraveling, and I was just getting started. As dessert was served, my phone buzzed again. I pulled it out, ignoring the clatter of plates and the forced chatter around the table. The screen lit up with a message from Paul Carter, the bank manager who handled the trust's transactions. "Confirm, hold on all Foster family allowances," it read. My fingers hovered over the reply button, my pulse steady, despite the weight of the moment. They'd spent years treating me like a failure, but now it was time to show them the cost of their arrogance. I stepped away from the table, my voice low as I dialed Paul. "Put a hold on everything," I said, my tone calm but firm. "No disbursements for Edward, Nancy, or Tracy Foster. Effective immediately." Paul's response was professional, clipped. "Understood, Miss Foster. It's done." I hung up, slipping the phone back into my pocket and returned to my seat, my face giving nothing away. Tracy was the first to notice something was wrong. She frowned at her phone, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the screen frantically. "What's this?" she muttered, her voice rising. "My card's been declined." She swiped again, her cheeks flushing as the error message popped up. "This is impossible. I just used it this morning." Her eyes darted to me, suspicion creeping in, but I sipped my water unfazed. Dad's brow furrowed, his fork pausing midair. "What's going on, Tracy?" he asked, his tone sharp with irritation. She shoved her phone toward him, her voice trembling. "My account's frozen. And my real estate deal, the one for the downtown condos, it's falling through. They're saying the funds didn't clear." Her words came faster, laced with panic, as she scrolled through emails from her business partners. Mom's hand flew to her chest, her bracelet jangling. "This must be a mistake," she said, her eyes darting between Tracy and me. "Our accounts are fine. We've always been fine." But her voice wavered, betraying the doubt creeping in. She turned to Dad, her fingers gripping his arm. "Edward, what about the house? The taxes? The mortgage, is that safe?" Her question hung in the air, heavy with fear. I leaned back in my chair, my voice steady as I spoke. "The mansion belongs to the trust," I said, meeting their gazes one by one. "And I control the trust. Without my approval, there's no money for taxes, no money for anything." Dad's face went pale, his usual confidence replaced by a flicker of dread. "That's ridiculous," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. "We don't need your permission to live our lives." Tracy jumped in, her tone desperate. "You're bluffing," she said, her eyes wild. "You can't just cut us off. We have our own money, our own deals." But her trembling hands betrayed her, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Mom's voice cracked as she tried to reason with me. "Denise, be reasonable. We've always supported you. This is just a misunderstanding." Her words were hollow, a weak attempt to rewrite years of disdain. I shook my head, my expression cold. "For 3 years I've signed every check that paid for your cars, your vacations, your status," I said, my voice cutting through their protests. "You thought you were calling the shots? But it's been me all along." The truth landed like a blow, silencing their excuses. Tracy's phone buzzed again, an email from her biggest client canceling their contract. She gasped, her face crumpling as her carefully built empire began to unravel. Dad tried to regain control, his voice rising. "We don't need your handouts," he said, but his clenched fists told a different story. "We've managed just fine without you." I raised an eyebrow, letting the silence stretch. They could pretend all they wanted, but the reality was sinking in. Their lifestyle, their power, their entire world depended on me. Mom's eyes glistened with unshed tears, her composure crumbling. "Denise, you can't do this to us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I didn't waver. Their panic was palpable, their confidence shattered, and I felt no pity. They'd made their choice when they dismissed me, mocked me, tried to break me. Now they were facing the consequences. The dining room fell silent, the weight of my words from moments ago cutting off their fun still sinking in. My phone pinged with an email, breaking the tense quiet. I glanced at the screen, my breath catching as I saw the sender, a venture capitalist I'd pitched to last year. The subject line read, "Concerns about your startup's credibility." My blood boiled as I scanned the message. Tracy had spread lies to investors, calling my startup a scam, a desperate grab for cash. Her sabotage had cost me a critical funding round, nearly killing my company before it could stand. I looked up, my eyes locking on Tracy. "You told investors my startup was a fraud," I said, my voice low but sharp as a blade. Her face paled, her mouth opening to deny it. But I held up my phone, the email glowing like evidence in a courtroom. "This is from one of them. They heard it straight from you." The guest's whispers faded, all eyes on us. Tracy stammered, her hands shaking. "That's a lie," she snapped, but her voice cracked, betraying her guilt. Mom's eyes darted to Tracy, then back to me, her face a mix of guilt and defiance. Denise, Tracy was just protecting our family's reputation. She said, her voice trembling but firm. Your startup, it's risky. She was looking out for us. Dad nodded, his jaw tight. She didn't mean harm, he said, his tone softer, almost pleading. She was trying to keep our name clean. You know how gossip spreads in our circles. Their words hit like a punch to the gut. They knew what Tracy had done, tried to ruin my dream, and still stood by her, shielding her betrayal. Tracy seized the chance, her voice desperate but defiant. I had to, Denise, she said, her eyes wild. Your app was a joke, dragging our family down. I was saving us. Her excuse was flimsy, her panic clear as she clutched her phone, her empire crumbling with every passing second. The room felt smaller, the air thick with their collective betrayal. I set my phone down, my gaze cold and steady. You all knew, I said, my voice cutting through their excuses. You knew Tracy lied to investors, tried to destroy my work, and you're still defending her. Mom's hand clutched her necklace, her eyes glistening, but she didn't deny it. Dad looked away, his silence louder than words. Tracy's shoulders slumped, her bravado fading under the weight of exposure. You thought you could break me, I said, standing taller, my voice unwavering. But for 3 years I've signed every check that funded your lives, your cars, your vacations, Tracy's deals. You betrayed me, all of you, and I'm done. I paused, letting the word betrayal linger heavy and undeniable. No more allowances, no more trust fund, not a single cent. Mom gasped, her hands covering her mouth. Dad's face crumpled, his usual authority gone. Tracy's phone slipped from her hand, hitting the table with a dull thud. Their world was collapsing, and I felt no pity. They'd chosen Tracy's lies over me, protected her sabotage while dismissing my dream. Their loyalty wasn't to family, it was to their own status, their own comfort. Now they'd face the consequences of that choice, and I'd walk away stronger for it. As the party wound down, I stood up, ready to walk away. The air in the dining room was thick, the clinking of glasses and forced laughter replaced by a heavy stillness. Mom, Dad, and Tracy sat frozen, their faces a mix of shock and defeat. I'd had enough of their apologies, their excuses, their attempts to rewrite the past. It was time to make my final move, to show them I didn't need their approval or their world to thrive. I straightened my shoulders, my voice ringing clear. The $20 million trust fund is mine to manage, I said, locking eyes with each of them. And I'm redirecting every cent into my startup. My tech company, the one you called a joke, is my future. You get nothing, not now, not ever. My words cut through the silence, sharp and final. Mom gasped, her hand clutching her chest, but I didn't waver. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. Dad's voice broke the quiet, low and strained. Denise, the mansion, he said, his eyes pleading. If you don't release the funds, we can't pay the property taxes. They'll take it. His admission was raw, a crack in his polished facade. The Atlanta mansion, their symbol of status, was now a liability they couldn't afford. I met his gaze, unflinching. That's not my problem anymore, I said. You made your choices when you dismissed me. Tracy's head snapped up, her eyes wild with panic. You're destroying me, she said, her voice hoarse. My clients are gone. My deals are dead. I'm nothing without my reputation. Her hands shook as she gripped her phone as if it could save her crumbling empire. The woman who'd built her career on million-dollar condo projects was unraveling, her lavish lifestyle slipping through her fingers. I felt no pity. She'd tried to sabotage my startup, and now her world was collapsing under the weight of her own actions. Mom's voice trembled barely above a whisper. Denise, we're your family? She said, her eyes searching mine for a trace of mercy. You can't just abandon us. But her words rang hollow. They'd abandoned me first with their mockery, their favoritism, their betrayal. I shook my head, my resolve unshaken. Family doesn't tear each other down, I said. Family doesn't lie to investors to ruin someone's dream. You did that, not me. I took a step toward the door, my voice steady. I don't need you to succeed. I said the words, carrying a weight I'd carried for years. I've built my company from the ground up with my own work, my own vision. The trust fund is just a tool, one I'll use to prove you wrong. My startup wasn't just a dream. It was my reality, my proof that I could stand on my own. I didn't need their validation, their money, or their name to make it. The guests around us were silent, their eyes darting between me and my family. Dad sat motionless, his hands folded, staring at the table like it held answers he couldn't find. Mom's shoulders slumped, her face etched with resignation. Tracy's fingers hovered over her phone, but no new messages could undo the damage. They'd underestimated me, thought they could control me, but now they saw the truth. Their world had rested on my shoulders all along. I turned to leave, my steps deliberate. You thought you could break me, I said, pausing at the door. But I'm the one who's been holding you up. And I'm done. Their silence spoke volumes, a stark contrast to the laughter and scorn that had filled the room hours ago. They'd lost everything, their wealth, their status, their power, because they'd chosen to betray me instead of believe in me. As I walked out, the Atlanta skyline glowed through the mansion's windows, a reminder of the city where I'd carve my own path. I didn't look back. They'd face the consequences of their actions, tax notices piling up, clients walking away, their carefully curated lives falling apart. I was free, ready to build something bigger than their small-minded world, powered by my own strength and the trust fund I controlled. 6 months later, I stood in my new startup office watching Atlanta's skyline light up. The sleek space buzzed with energy screens glowing, team members brainstorming, and my app's logo shining on a wall-mounted monitor. My tech startup had become a rising star in Atlanta's competitive tech scene, with articles in local magazines calling it a game changer. The $20 million trust fund, once a lifeline for my family's extravagance, now fueled a company that was mine, built from late nights, hard choices, and a vision they'd mocked. My heart swelled with pride, not just for the success, but for proving them wrong. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad's world had shrunk. Without the trust fund's support, they couldn't pay the property taxes on their sprawling Atlanta mansion. They'd sold it at a loss, trading their glittering view of the city for a cramped apartment on the outskirts. I'd heard through old family friends that they now lived modestly, scraping by on Dad's dwindling investments and Mom's part-time consulting gigs. The life of private jets and gala dinners was a distant memory, replaced by budget grocery lists and second-hand furniture. Tracy's fall was even steeper. Her once glamorous real estate career had collapsed after her biggest clients walked away, spooked by her frozen accounts and canceled deals. With her reputation in tatters, she'd taken a desk job at a small property management firm, pushing paperwork for a fraction of her former income. The designer handbags and exclusive parties were gone, her social status reduced to whispers of what happened to her at industry events. She'd tried calling me once, leaving a voicemail I never returned. Her betrayal, spreading lies about my startup, still stung too deeply. Shannon Reed stood by my side through it all. My best friend and co-founder, she'd been there for every pitch, every setback, every win. As we reviewed our latest user data, she grinned, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "We did this, Denise," she said, her voice warm. "Not them. Not the trust, you and me." I nodded, grateful for her unwavering support. Our startup wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, with new investors lining up and users downloading our app by the thousands. Shannon's belief in me had been my anchor when my family tried to tear me down. Looking out at the city, I thought about the lesson I'd learned, one I wanted to share with anyone listening. Never underestimate someone because they might hold your future. My family thought they could control me, dismiss my dreams, even sabotage my work. But they'd been wrong. Self-reliance was my path to real success, not their money, not their approval, but my own grit and vision. I'd built something lasting, something they could never take away, because I'd bet on myself when no one else would. Their downfall wasn't my fault, but it was their consequence. Mom and Dad's arrogance, Tracy's betrayal, they'd brought this on themselves. They'd seen me as a failure, a dreamer who'd never measure up, but I'd turned their doubt into fuel. The trust fund, once their crutch, was now my tool to reshape the future. I didn't need their validation to know I'd won. To everyone who's followed this story, thank you for listening. Your support means the world, and I hope my journey resonates with you. Never let anyone make you feel small. Your strength is enough to build your own path. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me about a time you proved someone wrong or a dream you're chasing. And if you've enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to join me for more. Here's to building our own futures, no matter who doubts us.
I stared at the message on my phone, a faint smile playing at my lips despite the gravity of the situation. Flying to Rome with my lover. Have fun being poor. James's last taunt glowed mockingly on the screen. Oh, if he only knew. My name is Natalie, and at 29, I never expected to be tracking my husband's attempted escape through JFK Airport while coordinating with an international task force. But here I was, parked outside the terminal, watching the operation unfold through the feeds on my laptop. The irony was almost poetic. James thought he was being clever, draining what he believed were our personal accounts. He had no idea those accounts were actually fronts we'd set up weeks ago when we first caught wind of his embezzlement scheme. As Senior Vice President of Finance at Morton and Blake Investment Group, my husband had been systematically stealing millions from client accounts for months. He thought he was untouchable, brilliant even. That arrogance would be his downfall. I'd known something was off for weeks. The late nights at the office, the secretive phone calls, the sudden interest in our financial arrangements. When I discovered the first traces of suspicious transfers, I didn't confront him. Instead, I took my evidence straight to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. That's when Agent Catherine Torres entered our lives, though James knew her only as Amanda, the gorgeous new client who seemed so interested in both our investment services and him personally. Target is approaching security checkpoint. Agent Torres's voice crackled through my earpiece. He's with the female operative now. I watched through the camera feed as James strutted through the terminal, his arm around the waist of who he thought was his mistress. He had no idea she was one of our best undercover agents, or that every step he took was being monitored by a dozen law enforcement officers. Remember, I spoke softly into my mic, he's likely carrying the backup drive with all the transaction records. Don't let him dump it. Copy that, came the response. The pieces were all in place. Now it was just a matter of watching my husband's grandiose escape plan crumble around him. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Looking back, I should have seen the signs sooner. 6 months ago, when James started pushing me to combine all our accounts, I'd assumed it was about trust and marriage. He'd presented it so convincingly over dinner at our favorite restaurant, his brown eyes earnest as he talked about building our future together. I was touched by his apparent desire for transparency, never suspecting it was all part of his plan to gain access to everything. But James didn't know that my background in forensic accounting wasn't just a line on my resume. Before joining Morton and Blake, I'd spent 3 years tracking down corporate fraud schemes. The skills never quite leave you. The attention to detail, the ability to spot patterns in financial discrepancies, the instinct for recognizing when something just doesn't add up. The first red flag was the change in his routine. James had always been methodical, leaving for work at exactly 7:30 a.m. and returning by 6 p.m. Then suddenly, he started having emergency client meetings that kept him at the office until midnight. I might have believed it, except I caught him slipping once. His urgent client call showed a Dubai area code at 3 a.m. their time. The second warning came from his newfound interest in our home security system. He insisted on upgrading everything, adding cameras and motion sensors. At the time, I praised his attention to our safety. Now I realize he was paranoid about being watched himself, especially in his home office where he did most of his illegal transfers. Our account manager called, he'd mentioned casually last week. She suggested we diversify some investments. I'll handle everything. The confidence in his voice almost masked his nervousness. Almost. That's when I contacted Agent Torres. Within hours, we had a plan in motion. The FBI had already been investigating a series of suspicious international transfers from Morton and Blake, but they needed solid evidence linking it to someone inside. I could provide that connection. "I'm doing this for us," James had whispered this morning as he kissed me goodbye, thinking I was still asleep. "We'll have everything we ever dreamed of." If he only knew that his dreams of escape were about to turn into his worst nightmare. My phone buzzed with another message. This time it was a photo. James at a champagne bar in the terminal, toasting with the woman he thought was his mistress. "Thanks for making this so easy," he wrote. "BTW, I took a little extra from your personal emergency fund. Consider it payment for 5 years of pretending to love you." The words hit harder than I expected. Even knowing what kind of man he truly was, even after discovering his crimes, something about that casual cruelty made my chest tighten. I thought about the night we met, both new employees at Morton and Blake, sharing takeout Chinese food during late-night training sessions. I remembered how he'd brought me soup when I had the flu, how he'd held my hand at my father's funeral. Had it all been an act? "Target is getting restless," Agent Torres reported through my earpiece. "He's checked his watch 3 times in the last minute." I pulled up the security feed from the terminal. James was trying to look relaxed, but I could read the tension in his shoulders. He kept glancing at his phone, probably checking the time until his flight. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. He was carrying my father's vintage leather briefcase, the one I'd inherited after Dad passed away. The realization sparked something in me. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about every lie, every manipulation, every moment he'd used my trust against me. I thought about the clients whose lives he'd potentially ruined, the families whose savings he'd stolen, all while playing the role of devoted husband. "Agent Torres," I spoke into my mic, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my throat. "The evidence is in my father's briefcase. He always said it was the safest place to keep important documents. Knowing James, he's using it to transport the backup drive and any incriminating papers." "Copy that," she responded. "We'll make sure to secure it." I watched as James checked his phone again, his expression growing more anxious. He had no idea that his mistress had already alerted airport security about a suspicious package, ensuring they'd be pulled aside for additional screening. He didn't know that we'd frozen the accounts he thought he'd drained. He was probably wondering why his Rome-bound flight was mysteriously delayed. Time to end this charade. I picked up my phone and typed out one final message. "Maybe you should talk to the police officer behind you first." Through the security camera feed, I watched James's face transform as he read my message. His confident smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of panic as he spun around. The police officer wasn't actually behind him, not yet, but his reaction told me everything I needed to know. He was guilty, and he knew he was in trouble. "All units in position," Agent Torres's voice crackled in my earpiece. "We've got eyes on all exits." James was moving now, walking briskly toward the international terminal, my father's briefcase clutched tightly against his chest. His mistress kept pace beside him, one hand casually resting on his arm. I knew she was making sure he couldn't bolt. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I answered, keeping my eyes fixed on the security feed. "Your little game stops now," James's voice was cold, controlled. "I've got copies of every transaction you've ever signed off on. If I go down, you're coming with me." I felt a chill run down my spine. He was bluffing. He had to be. I'd been careful, documenting everything since I first suspected his scheme. But there was something in his voice that made me uneasy. "Really?" I kept my voice steady. And what transactions would those be? Don't play innocent, Natalie. Those offshore accounts? The shell companies? I've got proof you were involved from the beginning. Who do you think they'll believe? The devoted husband trying to protect his wife's interests, or the scorned woman seeking revenge? My heart raced. He was trying to twist this around, make me look like the guilty one. Classic James, always manipulating the situation to his advantage. But he'd made one crucial mistake. Interesting theory, I replied. Have you shared this evidence with Amanda? There was a pause. Through the camera feed, I saw him glance at the woman beside him. What does she have to do with this? Everything. I allowed myself a small smile. You see, Agent Torres has been very interested in hearing about those offshore accounts. The color drained from his face. On the screen, I watched him take a step back from his companion, realization dawning in his eyes. But it was too late. In one fluid motion, she had his arm behind his back. James Anderson, you're under arrest for embezzlement and corporate fraud, she announced, her voice carrying across the terminal as other agents moved in. But then something happened that I hadn't expected. James started laughing. Oh, Natalie, he said into the phone, his voice full of mockery despite his position. You really think this is over? Check your email. I just sent you something interesting from the corporate server. Turns out your father wasn't as clean as you thought he was. The phone slipped in my suddenly sweaty palm. With trembling fingers, I opened my email. There it was, a folder labeled Thomas Bennett Project Files. My father's name. I clicked it open and my world shifted beneath my feet. The documents filled my screen. Transaction records, emails, meeting minutes, all dating back to when my father was CFO at Morton and Blake 15 years ago. My hands shook as I scrolled through them. Project files showed systematic manipulation of accounts, carefully hidden beneath layers of legitimate transactions. The pattern was familiar, because it was the exact same method James had been using. Natalie? Agent Torres's voice cut through my haze. We've got him secured, but he's demanding to speak with his lawyer before... He knew, I interrupted, my voice barely a whisper. All this time, James knew about my father's involvement. That's why he chose me. That's why he pushed so hard to work at Morton and Blake. Through the terminal's security feed, I could see James being led away by agents, that smug smile still playing on his lips. He'd known this moment was coming. Even in handcuffs, he had an ace up his sleeve. Your father's case was before my time, Agent Torres said cautiously. What exactly are we looking at? I quickly forwarded her the files. James didn't create this embezzlement scheme. He found my father's old blueprint and expanded on it. The offshore accounts, the shell companies. Dad built the foundation 15 years ago. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Every memory of my father, his integrity, his principles, the lessons he'd taught me about right and wrong, now seemed tainted. Had James been watching me all these years, waiting for the perfect moment to use this information? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I've got more files, much more. Drop the charges or everything about Thomas Bennett goes public. Your choice, darling. I felt sick. James had orchestrated this perfectly. If the truth about my father came out, it wouldn't just destroy his legacy. It would implicate dozens of current Morton and Blake executives who had worked alongside him. The scandal would devastate the firm and everyone connected to it. He's trying to leverage this, isn't he? Agent Torres asked, reading my silence. Yes, I admitted, but he's made one critical mistake. I pulled up the original files my father had left me, the ones stored in an encrypted drive I'd found after his death. James didn't know about these, couldn't know about them. Dad had documented everything, including the names of those who had forced him into the scheme. My father wasn't the mastermind, I said, my voice growing stronger. He was the whistleblower, and I can prove it. The pieces were falling into place now. Dad hadn't been able to come forward before his death, but he'd left everything I needed to finish what he'd started. James had only seen half the story, the part that looked incriminating. He had no idea he'd just handed me the key to exposing the entire corruption ring at Morton and Blake. I rushed to my office at Morton and Blake, Agent Torres following close behind. The building was nearly empty at this hour, but I knew exactly where to look. My father's old office, now a storage room, held the final piece of evidence we needed. Your father suspected this might happen, I explained as we descended to the basement level. He left me a series of clues in his personal journals. I never understood them until now. The storage room was cluttered with old filing cabinets and forgotten furniture. In the corner stood my father's ancient desk, deemed too heavy to move. I ran my fingers along its underside, finding the hidden catch he'd described in his journals. With a click, a small compartment opened. Got it, I breathed, pulling out a weathered USB drive. Ms. Bennett, a voice called from the doorway. We turned to find Harold Wright, Morton and Blake's current CEO, watching us with cold eyes. I believe you have something that belongs to the company. 2 security guards flanked him. This wasn't good. Actually, I replied, keeping my voice steady, this belongs to the FBI now. I handed the drive to Agent Torres, who quickly secured it. Wright's facade cracked slightly. You're making a serious mistake, Natalie. Think about your career, your reputation, your father's legacy. My father's legacy? I felt a surge of anger. You mean the legacy you and the board created when you forced him to participate in your scheme? When you threatened to destroy him if he didn't help hide your fraud? Wright's expression darkened. You can't prove any of that. Really? I pulled out my phone and played a recording. My father's voice, weak but clear, documenting every detail of the board's corruption in his final days. Dad may not have lived to testify, but he made sure the truth would come out. Wright lunged for Agent Torres, but the security guards, who I now realized were actually FBI agents, grabbed him first. As they led him away in handcuffs, I noticed James being escorted through the lobby below. Their eyes met, and I watched the color drain from my husband's face as he realized his powerful allies couldn't help him anymore. Your father would be proud, Agent Torres said softly. I nodded, emotion threatening to overwhelm me. The evidence on that drive would expose decades of corruption at Morton and Blake, clearing my father's name and bringing down everyone involved in the scheme. James had thought he was so clever, using my father's past against me, but he'd never understood what kind of man Thomas Bennett really was. My phone buzzed. Another message from James. We can still work this out. I'll tell them everything about your father's involvement. I smiled as I typed my response. Go ahead. The whole truth is exactly what I want them to hear. The next morning, I sat in the FBI's Manhattan office, watching the dominoes fall. On multiple screens, news channels broadcast the same story. Massive fraud scheme exposed at Morton and Blake, CEO and executives arrested. Agent Torres handed me a coffee as we watched the coverage. 17 arrests so far, she reported. Your father's evidence was bulletproof. The encrypted timestamps proved the board's manipulation of his original reports. They can't claim he was acting alone. James appeared on one screen, being led into court. His designer suit was wrinkled, his confident smirk replaced by a look of defeat. The reporter's voice cut through the room. James Anderson, along with CEO Harold Wright, faces multiple charges of fraud and embezzlement. Sources say the scheme dates back 15 years, with recent evidence revealing attempted whistleblowing by former CFO Thomas Bennett. Your father's name has been cleared, Agent Torres said softly. I nodded, emotion tightening my throat. Dad had sacrificed everything to expose the truth, carefully documenting the corruption while appearing to play along. He'd known the evidence would eventually surface. He just hadn't lived to see it happen. An email arrived from James's lawyer. My client wishes to convey the following message. You've ruined everything. I hope you're satisfied. I smiled as I drafted my response. Please inform your client that he ruined everything himself. And yes, I am satisfied. Justice has finally been served. 1 month later, I sat in the courtroom as the judge delivered the sentences. James's face remained emotionless as he heard the verdict. 20 years for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and attempted flight to avoid prosecution. Harold Wright and the other executives received similar sentences. The corruption at Morton and Blake had been completely exposed, and the firm was undergoing a total restructuring under new leadership. The federal investigation had recovered most of the stolen funds. The money would be returned to the affected clients, along with compensation from the firm's insurance. My father's detailed records had made this possible, his final gift to the people he'd tried to protect. After the sentencing, Agent Torres approached me with an unexpected offer. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division could use someone with your skills, she said. Someone who understands how these schemes work from the inside. Would you be interested in consulting for us? I thought about my father, about how he'd fought to expose the truth while protecting his family. I thought about all the other companies where similar frauds might be happening, other families who might be suffering. Yes, I replied, I would. As I left the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in months. My father's name had been cleared, justice had been served, and I had found a new purpose. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about making sure the truth finally comes to light.